I thought cutting off my parents and brother from my wedding was drastic until I uncovered their plan to sabotage my big day and the shocking truth about my entire childhood. The day I decided not to invite my parents or brother to my wedding was the same day I stopped lying to myself about who they really were, because sometimes choosing peace means cutting out the ones who claim to love you the most. I never imagined I'd look out at my wedding guests and not see my parents sitting in the front row beaming with pride, or my brother cracking one of his dumb jokes to lighten the mood, but then again, I'd spent a lifetime imagining a family that didn't exist, hoping one day they'd show up for me the way I'd always shown up for them. Growing up, we looked like your typical suburban family on the outside, a decent 4-bedroom house with a big oak tree in the front yard, cookouts in the summer, and holiday lights strung across the porch in winter. But behind those smiling holiday photos was a truth I buried so deep I almost convinced myself it wasn't there, until Neil, my younger brother, started stealing the spotlight every single time something mattered in my life. It started when I was around 10 and Neil was 7. He had a mild asthma attack during a soccer game, nothing life-threatening, just a standard episode that his doctor said could be managed with a basic inhaler and some rest. But from that day forward, my parents treated Neil like he was made of glass and the rest of us were just dust in the wind. My dad turned into a shadow, only surfacing when Neil had another so-called episode, and my mom? She basically became his full-time nurse, chauffeur, therapist, and PR rep all rolled into one. Meanwhile, I became background noise in my own life. When I was 12, I had a solo at the winter recital, a Chopin piece my piano teacher said was years beyond what most kids my age could even attempt. My parents promised they'd be there early, front row, camera ready. But at the last minute I got a call backstage. Neil was having a flare-up. No recital, no applause, no photo for the fridge. Later that night, my grandma called to check in on Neil and told me he was at home playing Xbox when she spoke to him. Turns out the only thing flaring up was his new high score. That kind of thing kept happening. 16th birthday? They were supposed to pick up the cake and party decorations. Neil suddenly needed urgent care, and they disappeared for hours only to come home with most of the cake eaten and no real explanation except he wasn't feeling well. I spent that party smiling for relatives I barely knew while my stomach twisted with worry over my brother, only to find out it was just allergies. Seasonal. Mild. Treatable. Disposable excuses stacked like dominoes. The final straw during high school was graduation. I had worked like a dog, pulled double shifts at a burger joint just to help save for college, and still managed to graduate valedictorian. That speech I wrote? I practiced it for weeks. But my parents? They missed it because Neil was stressed about finals that weren't even happening until the next week. I gave my speech in front of hundreds of people, but the only faces I could focus on were the empty chairs I'd saved for my family. I should have seen it coming, but part of me always thought they'd change. That they'd wake up one day and realize how much they'd missed. Instead, they doubled down, especially when it came to money. Neil had a full college fund waiting for him in case he had medical expenses, while I took out loans, busted my back in 2 part-time jobs, and still scraped by on instant noodles and 5-hour nights. Even then, I didn't complain. I just kept grinding. But it all came to a head after Jamie proposed. Jamie, who had a family that actually showed up. Jamie, who cheered at my work conferences louder than anyone else. Jamie, whose mom hugged me like I was already one of her own. When he proposed and we started planning the wedding, the idea of inviting my family made my skin crawl. I could already see the scenario, my mom walking out in the middle of our vows because Neil texted he had a headache. Or worse, them not showing up at all and making me feel like I deserved it. Jamie told me I didn't have to invite anyone who didn't value me, and after a lot of late-night talks, I decided they weren't coming. Not my parents, not Neil. I sent invites to the rest of the family but asked them not to mention anything. Some were shocked but most understood. And when the day finally came, surrounded by people who wanted to be there, I knew I'd made the right call. What I didn't expect was the fallout, especially not the truth that came out after. If you'd told me a year ago that my brother would admit to faking most of his so-called health problems just to steal attention, I would have laughed bitterly and said, yeah, no kidding, but hearing it come from him? That hit different. Like someone took a match to the entire foundation of my childhood and said, hey, look, it was all made of paper. It didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. It brought rage, confusion, and this hollow pit in my chest that no apology could ever fill. It started just a few days after the wedding. Jamie and I were back home, still riding that post-wedding high, when my cousin Kay called. She was one of the few relatives I trusted enough to invite, and we'd always had this quiet understanding, like she saw the family dynamics for what they were but never dared say it out loud. This time, though, her voice trembled like she'd been holding onto a secret for far too long. She told me Neil had been at a baseball game the same night my parents claimed he was in the hospital having an anxiety attack over not being invited to the wedding. While my mom was texting me dramatic updates like, Neil's in the ER, he couldn't breathe, he was out with friends, beer in hand, laughing in the stands like nothing was wrong. Kay saw him. She took pictures. He even posted a story to his Instagram with the caption, "Game night with the boys." My blood went cold. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. Jamie's mom, bless her heart, has been a pediatric nurse for over 3 decades. She'd heard the stories, seen the patterns, and finally decided to step in. She called my mom to have a calm, professional conversation. Tried to bridge the gap to suggest maybe we could plan some sort of post-wedding celebration and move forward. But when she gently brought up the inconsistencies in Neil's conditions, how he goes hiking, runs 10 Burmese chats, plays intramural soccer, my mom didn't take it well. She hung up mid-sentence and then called Jamie's sister to complain about outsiders interfering in family business. That same night, I had a memory hit me like a sucker punch, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 17, it was homecoming, and I'd saved up for months to buy this dress I'd been eyeing since August. Midnight blue, backless, sleek but modest. It was the most I'd ever spent on something that was just for me. I'd been nominated for the homecoming court and that dress was supposed to be my moment. But of course, Neil got sick again. He doubled over on the couch, groaning about stomach pain. My parents freaked out like he was having appendicitis. They rushed him to the ER and told me to wait at home just in case they got back in time. I sat in that dress for 3 hours, makeup done, heels on, scrolling through texts from my friends asking where I was. They never came back. Turns out it was gas. Just gas. They left me behind and missed one of the biggest nights of my high school life for a minor stomach ache that could have been treated with a ginger ale and a warm blanket. That's when Kay dropped the real bomb. She had texts. From my mother. Dated before she even knew she wasn't invited to the wedding. In them, she wrote about worrying Neil might need support on my wedding day. One line burned itself into my brain like a cigarette pressed to skin. We might need to create a moment for Neil if things get overwhelming. Create a moment. That was the line that turned my stomach. They were planning a disruption. Before they even knew they weren't welcome. I couldn't eat that night. Could barely sleep. I just kept playing it over and over again, my entire childhood reframed, not just as neglect but as calculated sabotage. Every event, every missed opportunity, every moment I thought I was being too sensitive or dramatic, it was all real. It was always about Neil. And it was orchestrated. Jamie tried to comfort me, but I think he knew there was no easy fix for what I just learned. There's no way to unhear your family plotting to steal your spotlight. No way to go back to believing their love was just misguided and not manipulative. I always thought the worst part was that they never showed up for me. But the truth? The worst part is learning they made sure no one else could either. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always come with yelling or broken dishes or slammed doors. Sometimes it shows up as a quiet email at midnight from the very person who's been the center of every lie that shaped your life. That's how I heard from Neil. No text, no call, just a subject line that read, "I'm sorry. I need to tell you everything." I must have stared at that email for 20 minutes before I even clicked on it. The message was long, almost rambling, but not vague. Not this time. Neil laid it all out in brutal, uncomfortable detail, and by the end of it I wasn't sure if I wanted to punch a wall or just lie down and cry until morning. He apologized. Genuinely. Said he'd been going to therapy, not just for anxiety like he'd told the family, but because he'd finally started unraveling the years of behavior that had quietly poisoned both of our lives. He said it started simple. When we were kids, he noticed that if he said he didn't feel well, Mom would drop everything. Dad would cancel plans. He'd get ice cream, early pickup from school, attention that otherwise never came. He swore it wasn't intentional at first. But over time, he realized it worked. Every time. Especially when something big was happening for me. He wrote about that winter concert when I was 12, the one where he had a mysterious asthma flare-up. He said he wasn't even having trouble breathing. He just didn't want to be left alone while everyone went to watch me. That was the night he learned just how easy it was to make our parents miss things if he faked it convincingly enough. And from then on, it became a pattern, one that snowballed until it felt like second nature. He admitted he planned his migraines and anxiety attacks around my milestones. Not all of them, but enough to make me doubt my own worth. He even remembered the night of my graduation, the one where I stood on a stage giving the valedictorian speech I had poured my soul into while Mom and Dad sat at home because Neil was panicking about finals. He said he knew exactly what he was doing that night, and he hated himself for it. Reading that part made my hands shake. But what got me most wasn't just the confession, it was the fact that he admitted our parents knew. Not fully, maybe. Not in detail. But they chose not to question it. Every time. He told me he'd overheard Mom once say, if Neil says he doesn't feel well, we need to believe him, he's always been sensitive and we don't want to trigger something worse. He said it was like they wanted him to be fragile. Like it gave them purpose. When I finished the email, I didn't cry like I expected to. I just sat there feeling this eerie, hollow calm, like I'd been screaming underwater for years and now someone had finally surfaced and said, I heard you. It was too late to undo the damage, but it was the first time I didn't feel crazy for remembering all the things they told me to forget. Jamie read the email next. His jaw clenched tighter with every paragraph. You know what this means, right? He said, finally looking at me like I was still catching up. You weren't just neglected. You were erased. A few days later, Kay called again. She confronted Neil about the messages from our mom, the ones where she hinted at creating drama on our wedding day. He didn't deny it. Said when he saw those texts, he got physically sick. Said that was when he stopped trying to protect our parents and started facing what they'd actually done, not just to me, but to him too. And here's where it turned again. Neil told Kay he was finally ready to step away from them. He was applying for full-time jobs, planning to move out of the apartment our parents paid for, and looking for a therapist who specialized in family trauma. I don't want to be that guy anymore, he wrote. I want to be your brother, not your burden. I wanted to believe him. And part of me did. But part of me also wondered why it took him so long. Why it had to reach the point where they were planning sabotage before he found his conscience. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. Forgiveness isn't something you just hand out like candy. Especially not when it's been stolen from you one lie at a time. Then, like clockwork, my parents tried to re-enter the picture. This time, it wasn't accusations. It was crocodile tears. Voicemails that sounded like rehearsed sob stories about losing both of our children and how things used to be. But not once did they acknowledge what they had done or that they were complicit in all of it. Instead, they kept insisting Neil's condition had worsened since the wedding and that the stress I'd caused was damaging his health. That same day, Jamie found a photo on Neil's social media. He was at a weekend retreat with friends, drinking wine, hiking, laughing. The caption read, "New chapter. No more lies." And I realized then the only people still lying were the ones who raised us. It's strange how truth doesn't set you free so much as it clears the wreckage. You're not flying off into some peaceful new chapter, you're just standing barefoot in the rubble, finally seeing how bad the damage really is. That's how it felt waking up the morning after I read Neil's email. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't vindicated. I was just tired. Tired in a way I didn't know existed until the denial was gone and all that remained was clarity. Jamie made us breakfast that morning and didn't say a word about the email until I finally broke the silence. I asked him, what do I even do with this? And he just looked at me, quiet for a second, then said, whatever gives you peace. That's the only measure that matters now. That hit me. Because peace wasn't something I'd ever been allowed to chase growing up. Every decision had to orbit around Neil, his flare-ups, his anxiety, his needs. Even when I tried to have boundaries, they got bulldozed by some new crisis. And now, with the truth out in the open, I realized I had the right to do nothing. I didn't know anyone an answer, not even Neil. But part of me wanted to try, not for him necessarily, but for me, to see if there was any piece of our relationship worth salvaging. So I agreed to meet him for coffee at a little shop halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground, public space, no room for theatrics. He showed up on time, looking lighter somehow, like someone who'd just put down a suitcase they'd been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. He looked nervous, kept fidgeting with his sleeves like he didn't know where to start. So I let him talk. He didn't make excuses. That's what surprised me. No deflection. No blaming our parents. No, I was just a kid. He said, I messed up, and not just by faking symptoms. I let you suffer alone because I was too addicted to the attention. It wasn't fair. You deserved parents, and you got stagehands for my performance. That line gutted me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. We talked for an hour, maybe longer. I asked him if he remembered the science competition I was supposed to attend the summer before college, the one where I was offered a scholarship to a summer research program at a university out of state. I missed it because he had asthma complications that lasted exactly the length of the program. He nodded. said he remembered. Then he added something I wasn't prepared for. Mom told me not to feel guilty, he said. She said your scholarship wasn't a big deal, and that family comes first. I believed her. I thought, maybe I didn't have to feel bad because you'd be fine. You were always the strong one. That phrase, the strong one. I'd heard it my whole life. It's what they said when they forgot to show up. When they missed birthdays or recitals or award ceremonies. You're strong, you understand. It was their get-out-of-guilt-free card, and I'd bought it every time. I told Neil about the texts from Mom, the ones where she was planning to stir something up on my wedding day. His face went pale. I knew they were obsessed with protecting me, he said. But I didn't know they were willing to sabotage you like that. He looked me straight in the eye and added, I'm not going back to them. Not unless they admit what they've done. It was the first time I ever saw him choose me over them. Later that week, things took a darker turn. My father left a voicemail on my phone that didn't even try to mask the manipulation. He accused me of orchestrating family division and said I had ruined Neil's health with my selfishness. There it was again, the guilt, the projection, the fantasy where I'm the villain for refusing to play a part in their scripted tragedy. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life I didn't doubt my decision. And I wasn't alone. Kay, my cousin, the silent observer all those years, sent me a photo she'd found in a box of old family albums. It was of me at age 14, standing alone at a birthday party while Neil opened a second gift he had earned for not feeling well that day. I looked so small, so out of place at my own celebration. She wrote in the caption, You've been invisible too long. I see you now. Jamie's family, too, never wavered. His dad gave a toast at a small post-wedding dinner and said, Some people come into a family through marriage, but some were born into one that never deserved them. We're glad you're finally where you belong. I'll be honest, I almost cried right there at the table, because I finally realized that family doesn't have to mean DNA. Can mean presence, respect, effort. And sometimes it means letting go of the people who never saw you to make room for the ones who always did. You'd think that once the truth came out, things would start to settle. But that's not how it works with people like my parents. No, when their version of reality starts slipping through their fingers, they don't admit fault or apologize. They double down. They rewrite the narrative. And this time, their new story was that I was punishing a sick brother and breaking apart a loving family all for the sake of attention. They started with the extended relatives. My aunt called out of the blue, voice sharp and brittle, like she was trying to hold back judgment but couldn't quite help herself. She asked if it was true that I hadn't invited my parents or Neil to the wedding. I told her yes. She paused, then said she hoped I could find it in my heart to let the past go. The past? I asked. You mean my entire childhood? There was a beat of silence, then a sigh, and then the usual line. You know your brother has always had health issues. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because I'd heard that same phrase so many times it felt like a lullaby composed just to rock me into silence. But this time I didn't let it work. I told her about Neil's confession. I told her about the wedding day sabotage plan. And when I finished, she didn't say anything for a while. Then she muttered, I always wondered why they never showed up for your events. That's when I realized something important. People had seen it. Maybe they didn't say anything, maybe they convinced themselves it wasn't their business, but they noticed. And now that the truth was breaking the surface, it wasn't just my parents who had to reckon with it. The next hit came through Jamie. His mom had tried, again, to mediate. She called my mother, calm and professional, suggesting they talk things through. My mother exploded, claimed Jamie's entire family was trying to drive a wedge between us. She even accused Jamie's sister, who had been one of my bridesmaids, of poisoning me against the family. It was delusion wrapped in victimhood and dipped in self-righteousness. After that, Jamie and I made a pact: no more mediation. No more chances. No more calls. But of course, they found other ways. A few days later, Neil sent me a screenshot of a group chat between him, Mom, and Dad. It was from the week of the wedding. In it, Mom was pushing hard for Neil to stay visible online, saying things like, make sure people see you're doing okay, she needs to understand what real family looks like. Dad responded with some vague comment about reminding everyone who the good child is. It was surreal. Like they were running a PR campaign against their own daughter. That same night, I received a message from a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. She was confused, said she'd seen photos from the wedding and was surprised my parents weren't there. When I told her why, she admitted she always thought something was off but didn't realize how deep it went. It was happening all around me, this slow unraveling of the family myth. The one where I was the rebellious child who didn't appreciate sacrifices and Neil was the fragile one we all had to protect. Now that people were hearing the other side, the cracks were spreading. But with that came backlash. My father left a voicemail that could have won an award for theatrical rage. He said I was shaming the family and destroying years of goodwill with my selfish vendetta. Then he dropped the line that really got me. You've always resented Neil for being loved more. Not denied. Not dismissed. Loved more. I played that voicemail twice just to make sure I heard it right. Then I saved it. I didn't want to forget. Because as painful as it was also the first time they said what I'd always known but never dared speak aloud. They loved him more. Whether it was because he was a boy, or because he was younger, or because his illness gave them a sense of purpose, I don't know. I probably never will. But hearing it said out loud gave me the closure I didn't even know I was waiting for. In the middle of all this, Jamie's dad organized a small dinner at their house. Just family. The real kind. After dessert, he stood up and gave a toast, not some generic blessing, but one specifically for me. He listed my accomplishments, one by one. Not just academic stuff, but things like how I carried myself through the storm, how I refused to shrink under pressure. I tried to hold it together, but when he ended with, "We're proud to call you our daughter," I broke. It wasn't just the words. It was that they saw me. Not as an accessory to someone else's needs. Not as a shadow in the background of another child's crisis. But as me. I don't know what kind of relationship I'll end up having with Neil. I want to believe people can change and maybe he really is trying. But I also know that healing doesn't mean inviting the past to dinner. Sometimes it means sitting at a new table with people who didn't create your wounds. And if my parents want a relationship, it starts with the one thing they've never given me, accountability. But I'm not holding my breath. There's something haunting about realizing you spent your entire childhood begging people to love you who were never even capable of seeing you. It's like trying to win a game you didn't know was rigged from the start, hoping that if you just played better, tried harder, smiled wider, they'd notice. They care. But now, standing on the other side of that truth, I wasn't hoping anymore. I was watching them implode from a distance, and for once, I felt nothing but clarity. A month after the wedding, Neil and I met again, this time not as enemies orbiting the same chaotic center, but as two people trying to figure out who they were when they weren't defined by our parents' dysfunction. He told me he'd found a full-time job in marketing, something he was actually excited about, and was moving out of the apartment they paid for. He wanted to get his own place. He was choosing discomfort over dependency, and as much as I still had questions, I respected that. But then he dropped something that pulled the floor out from under me. He said Mom had seen the email he sent me, the one where he confessed everything, and she'd threatened to cut off his support if he didn't retract it. Apparently, she found it open on the shared home computer when he visited one weekend. She read every word. And instead of facing the damage or taking any kind of ownership, she accused him of betraying the family and trying to ruin her daughter's life with lies. Her daughter. As if I wasn't even her child anymore. But here's what made my stomach turn. He said she planned to frame it as a mental health crisis. That if people found out about the email, she would tell them he was unstable and hallucinating. That he wasn't well and didn't know what he was saying. And right there, in that one threat, was everything I had ever feared about our family. Not just the favoritism or the neglect, but the manipulation, the willingness to warp reality until they were the victims of a story they wrote themselves. I asked Neil if he was still talking to them. He shook his head. Said he blocked them. That he didn't want to be used as a prop in their drama anymore. I believed him, but I also knew how deep their claws ran. How easy it was to slip back into the comfort of being needed. Just a few days later, I got an email from my mom. A long one. The kind she used to send when she wanted to guilt me into returning her calls. Only this one wasn't a guilt trip, it was a threat disguised as desperation. She told me Neil had suffered another episode from the stress of my accusations. That she and my father had to take him to the emergency room. That I was tearing the family apart and endangering my brother's life just because I couldn't let go of a few missed events. Then she said something I'll never forget: if anything happens to him, it will be on your conscience. There it was. The dagger. The same one they'd used 100 different ways when I was younger. But this time it didn't cut. Because I already knew the truth. Neil wasn't in the ER. He was out with coworkers at a team-building event, and he texted me a photo of him laughing next to a fake rock wall with a harness around his waist. The timestamp matched the exact hour Mom claimed he was in a hospital bed. So I sent her a one-line reply, "Stop lying. I'm not playing this game anymore." And then I blocked her. That night, Jamie wrapped his arms around me while I sat on the couch in silence, phone face down on the coffee table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, I realized I'd finally made peace with the one truth that had always terrified me. They never wanted to share the spotlight. They just wanted to make sure I never stood in it. And now? Now I was done waiting for them to see me. I was walking straight into the light they tried so hard to dim. It's one thing to cut people off, it's another thing entirely to face the silence that follows. Because for the first time in my life, the chaos was gone. No voicemails telling me I was selfish. No carefully worded texts pretending to care while hiding a knife between the lines. No last-minute hospital emergencies pulled out of thin air like magic tricks. It was just quiet. And at first, I didn't know what to do with it. The thing about growing up in a house where everything revolves around someone else's supposed fragility is that you start measuring your worth by how well you stay invisible. How many times you keep your disappointment to yourself. How often you pretend not to be hurt so they won't accuse you of being dramatic. So when the quiet came, I expected to feel free. But what I actually felt was uncertain, like I'd stepped out of a storm and didn't know how to live without the wind howling in my ears. Jamie noticed it before I did. One morning he asked, "Why do you flinch every time you get a text notification?" I laughed it off, but later that day, I realized I'd been bracing for impact every time my phone lit up. Expecting another guilt trip. Another manipulation. Another grenade tossed with a smile. But they didn't come. Not this time. Not after I blocked them all. What to come was something else entirely, a message from Kay. She said she'd shown our family, specifically a few of the aunts and uncles who had always defended my parents, the screenshots. The ones of Neil's confession. The ones of my mom plotting a distraction at my wedding. The ones they never thought anyone would see. She said a few of them apologized to her and then to me. One uncle sent an actual card. Not a text. A handwritten apology where he said he had spent years thinking I was just the quiet one who didn't like attention. That he hadn't realized I wasn't quiet, I'd just been silenced. That hit hard. I had grown up thinking my voice didn't matter. And now, all of a sudden, people were listening, not because I raised it, but because I stopped apologizing for having one. Around that same time, Jamie and I started packing up for Boston. He'd accepted a job at a research institution, and I'd gotten an offer from a biotech firm that made my years of brutal study and sleepless nights finally feel worth it. It was the kind of move that felt like more than just a change of address. It felt like starting over without the weight of anyone else's expectations tying us to the past. Before we left, Neil asked if he could see me one more time. I agreed. We met in a park not far from where we both used to ride bikes as kids back before everything got complicated, before love came with strings and milestones came with interruptions. He looked tired. Like someone who had finally stepped away from the spotlight but didn't know how to live in the shadows. He told me he was cutting them off completely. That when our parents found out he had confessed, they threatened to pull every last thread of financial support. And he let them. Said he was finding a studio apartment in a different city. Said he'd rather struggle on his own than live in comfort under a lie. For the first time, I believed him. And I told him something I didn't expect to say: I forgive you. Not because he earned it. Not because it erased the pain. But because holding on to resentment was like dragging a dead weight into the future, and I was done bleeding for a family that never noticed the cuts. He cried. I didn't. That surprised us both. Before we left, he asked if we could stay in touch. I told him maybe. That healing doesn't always mean reunion, it just means you stop letting the wound define you. Jamie and I hit the road 2 days later. New city. New life. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. And for the first time, when someone said they were proud of me, I believed them. Boston felt different the moment we arrived. Maybe it was the ocean breeze or the smell of something sweet and roasted coming from a bakery down the block, but as I stood on the balcony of our new apartment, cardboard boxes still stacked behind me, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. This life was mine. Not borrowed, not overshadowed, not built on making room for someone else's problems. Just mine. And Jamie's. Ours. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking, adjusting, and walking hand in hand through a city that didn't know our past. Every street was a reset button, every dinner out felt like a celebration of surviving something invisible. Some nights we'd talk about it, the family stuff, but more and more, it faded into the background like a bad dream you only half remember. Then, one quiet Saturday morning, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Neatly folded paper. My name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years but would recognize anywhere, my mother's. For a second, I didn't open it. I just held it. It was heavier than it should have been, like paper soaked in old memories. When I finally read it, it wasn't an apology. It was a justification. She wrote about how hard motherhood had been, how scared she was for Neil, how I always seemed so strong and didn't need as much. She wrote about how family is supposed to forgive, how you'll understand when you have children of your own. And then the line that made my jaw tighten: we were only doing what we thought was right. No ownership. No mention of the sabotage. No acknowledgement of the years lost. Just excuses dressed as explanations. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, out of record-keeping. Proof for myself that I didn't imagine any of it. That even with the truth exposed, they would rather rewrite history than face it. Neil reached out again, just a short message this time. Said he was doing okay. Asked how Boston was treating me. Told me he'd finally told one of his co-workers the truth about his family and didn't feel ashamed anymore. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. But a few days later, I sent back, "I hope you're still trying. That matters more than you know. Because I do want him to heal. But I've learned that you can root for someone's recovery without inviting their wreckage into your home." Weeks turned into months, and one evening Jamie and I hosted a small dinner with some new friends. Nothing fancy. Just laughter echoing off the walls and people who only knew me as I am now, not the girl who got forgotten but the woman who built something from the silence. After everyone left, I sat in the kitchen while Jamie washed dishes, music playing low in the background. And out of nowhere I felt it. Not happiness exactly, but peace. A deep, settled kind of peace that comes when you've finally stopped bleeding for people who never tried to stop the cut. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need their approval or their recognition or even their regrets. Because I had something better. My own life, free from their shadow. A future built on truth. Partner who showed up. And a voice I'd finally learned to use, not to shout, but to say, "I deserve more." And the best part? No one could take it from me ever again.